Okay, I'm gonna pick up where I left off because my son came to take up a little space and knock the phone over. So, okay. Their kids were wide awake and watching us this morning. I feel sorry for the little ones, but the ones my age and older make me nervous. When we ride down the middle of the cracked street and the kids come out and stand along the curb, they stare at us. They just stand and stare. I think if there were only one or two of us and they couldn't see our guns, they might try to pull us down and steal our bikes, our clothes, our shoes, whatever. Then what? Rape? Murder? We could wind up like that naked woman, stumbling along, dazed, maybe hurt, sure to attract dangerous attention unless she could steal some clothing. I wish we could have given her something. My stepmother says she and my father stopped to help an injured woman once, and the guys who had injured her jumped out from behind a wall and almost killed them. And we're in Robledo, 20 miles from Los Angeles, and according to Dad, once a rich, green, unwalled little city that he had been eager to abandon when he was a kid. Like Keith, he had wanted to escape the dullness of Robledo for big city excitement in L.A. L.A. was better then, less lethal. He lived there for 21 years. Then in 2010, his parents were murdered, and he inherited their house. Whoever killed them had robbed the house, smashed up the furniture, but they didn't torch anything. There was no neighborhood wall back then. Crazy to live without a wall to protect you. Even in Robledo, much of the street poor, squatters, winos, junkies, homeless people in general, are dangerous. They're desperate or crazy or both. That's enough to make anyone dangerous. Worse for me, they often have things wrong with them. They cut off each other's ears, arms, legs. They carry untreated diseases and festering wounds. They have no money to spend on water to wash with, so even the unwounded have sores. They don't get enough to eat, so they're malnourished or they eat bad food and poison themselves. As I rode, I tried not to look around at any of them, but I couldn't help seeing or collecting some of their general misery. I can take a lot of pain without falling apart. I've had to learn to do that, but it was hard today to keep pedaling and to keep up with the others when just about everyone I saw made me feel worse and worse. My father glanced back at me every now and then. He tells me, "You can beat this thing. You don't have to give in to it." He has always pretended or perhaps believed that my hyperempathy syndrome was something I could shake off and forget about. The sharing isn't real after all. It isn't some magic or ESP that allows me to share in the pleasure or pain of others. It's delusional. Even I admit that. My brother Keith used to pretend to be hurt just to try to trick me into sharing his pain. Once he used red ink as fake blood to make me bleed. I was 11 then, and I still bled through the skin whenever I saw someone else's bleeding. I couldn't help doing it, and I always worried that it would give me away to people outside the family. I haven't shared bleeding with anyone since I was 12 and got my first period. What a relief that was. I just wish all the rest of it had gone away too. Keith only tricked me into bleeding that once, and I beat the hell out of him for it. I didn't fight much when I was little because it hurt me so. I felt every blow that I struck, just as though I hit myself. So when I did decide that I had to fight, I set out to hurt the other kid more than kids usually hurt one another. I broke Michael Talcott's arm and Ruben Quintanilla's nose. I knocked out 4 of Sylvia Dunn's teeth. They all earned what I did to them, 2 or 3 times over. I got punished every time and I resented it. It was double punishment after all, and my father and stepmother knew it, but knowing didn't stop them. I think they did it to satisfy the other kids' parents, but when I beat up Keith, I knew that Corey or Dad or both of them would punish me for it. My poor little brother, after all. So I had to see to it that my poor little brother paid in advance. What I did to him had to be worthwhile in spite of what they would do to me. It was. We both got it later from Dad. Me for hurting a younger kid, and Keith for risking putting family business into the street. Dad is big on privacy and family business. There's a whole range of things we never even hint about outside of the family. First among these is anything about my mother, my hyperempathy, and how these two are connected. To my father, the whole business is shameful. He's a preacher and a professor and a dean, a first wife who was a drug addict, and a daughter who is drug damaged is not something he wants to boast about. Lucky for me, being the most vulnerable person I know is damn sure nothing I want to boast about. I can't do a thing about my hyperempathy, no matter what Dad thinks or wants or wishes. I feel what I see other feelings, or what I believe they feel. Hyperempathy is what the doctors call an organic delusional syndrome. Big shit. It hurts. That's all I know. Thanks to Paracetamol, the smart pill, the Einstein powder, the particular drug that my mother chose to abuse before my birth killed her, I'm crazy. I get a lot of grief that doesn't belong to me, and that isn't real, but it hurts. I'm supposed to share pleasure and pain, but there isn't much pleasure around these days. About the only real pleasure that I found that I enjoy sharing is sex. I get the guy's good feeling and my own. I almost wish I didn't. I live in a small, tiny, walled, fishbowl, cul-de-sac community, and I'm the preacher's daughter. There's a real limit to what I can do as far as sex goes. Anyway, my neurotransmitters are scrambled and they're going to stay scrambled. But I can do okay as long as other people don't know about me. Inside our neighborhood walls, I do fine. Our rides today, though, were hell. Going and coming. They were all of the worst things I've ever felt. Shadows and ghosts, twists and jabs of the unexpected pain. If I don't look too long at old injuries, they don't hurt me too much. There was a naked little boy whose skin was a mass of big red sores, and a man with a huge scab over where the stump of where his right hand used to be. A little girl, naked, maybe 7 years old, with blood running down her bare thighs. A woman with a swollen, bloody, beaten face. I must have seen Jumpy. I glanced around like a bird, not letting my gaze rest on anyone longer than it took me to see that they weren't coming in my direction or aiming anything at me. Dad may have read something of what I was feeling in my expression. I try not to let my face show anything, but he's good at reading me. Sometimes people say I look grim or angry. Better to have them think that than for them to know the truth. Better to have them think anything than let them know just how easy it is to hurt me. Dad had insisted on fresh, clean, potable water for the baptism. He couldn't afford it. Of course, who could? That was the other reason for the 4 extra kids. Sylvia Dunn, Hector Quintanilla, Curtis Talcott, and Drew Bader, along with my brothers Keith and Marcus. The other kids' parents had helped with the cost. They thought a proper baptism was important enough to spend some money and take some risk. I was the oldest by about 2 months. Curtis was next. As much as I hated being there, I hated even more that Curtis was there. I care about him more than I want to. I care what he thinks of me. I worry that I'll fall apart in public one day and he'll see. But not today. By the time we reached the Fortress Church, my jaw muscles hurt from clenching and unclenching my teeth, and overall I was exhausted. There were only 5 or 6 dozen people at the service, enough to fill up our front rooms at home and look like a big crowd. At the church, though, with its surrounding wall and security bars and laser wire and its huge hollowness inside and armed guards, the crowd seemed like a tiny scattering of people. That was all right. The last thing I wanted was a big audience to maybe trip me up with pain. The baptism went just as planned. They sent us kids off to the bathrooms, men's, women's. Please do not put any paper of any kind into the toilets. Water for washing in the bucket to the left. Undress and put on white gowns. When we were ready, Curtis's father took us to an anteroom where we could hear the preaching from the first chapter of St. John and the second chapter of the Acts and wait our turns. My turn came last. I assumed that was my father's idea. First the neighbor kids, then my brother, then me. For reasons that don't make any sense to me, Dad thinks I need more humility. I think my particular biological humility or humiliation is more than enough. What the hell? Someone had to be last. I just wish I could have been courageous enough to skip the thing altogether. So, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Catholics get this stuff out of the way when they're babies. I wish Baptists did. I almost wish I could believe it was important the way a lot of people seem to, the way my father seems to. Failing that, I wish I didn't care, but I do. The idea of God is much on my mind these days. I've been paying attention to what other people believe, whether they believe, and if so, what kind of God they believe in. Keith said God is just the adult's way of trying to scare you into doing what they want. He doesn't say that around Dad, but he says it. Keith believes in what he sees, and no matter what's in front of him, he doesn't see much. I suppose Dad would say that about me if he knew what I believe. Maybe he'd be right. But it wouldn't stop me from seeing what I see. A lot of people seem to believe in a big daddy God or a big cock God or a big king God. They believe in a kind of super person. A few believe God is another word for nature. And nature turns out to just mean anything they happen not to be able to understand or feel in control of. Some say God is a spirit, a force, an ultimate reality. Ask 7 people what all that means and you'll get 7 different answers. So what is God? Just another name for whatever makes you feel special and protected? There's a big early season storm blowing itself out of the Gulf of Mexico. It's bounced around the Gulf, killing people from Florida to Texas and down to Mexico. There are over 700 known dead so far. 1 hurricane. And how many people has it hurt? How many people are going to starve later because of destroyed crops? That's nature. Is it God? Most of the dead are the street poor who have nowhere to go and did not hear the warnings until it was too late for their feet to take them to safety. Where's safety for them anyway? Is it a sin against God to be poor? We're almost poor ourselves. There are fewer and fewer jobs among us, and more of us are being born, more kids growing up with nothing to look forward to. One way or another, we'll all be poor someday. The adults say things will get better, but they never have. How will God, my Father's God, behave toward us when we're poor? Is there a God? If there is, does he, she, it care about us? Deists like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson believed God was something that made us and then left us on our own. Misguided, Dad said when I asked him about deists. They should have had more faith in what their Bibles told them. I wonder if the people on the Gulf Coast still have faith. People have had faith through horrible disasters before. I read a lot about that kind of thing. I read a lot, period. My favorite book of the Bible is Job. I think it says more about my Father's God in particular and gods in general than anything else I've ever read. In the book of Job, God says he made everything and he knows everything, so no one has any right to question what he does with any of it. Okay, that works. That Old Testament God doesn't violate the way things are now. But that God sounds a lot like Zeus, a super powerful man playing with his toys, the way my youngest brothers play with toy soldiers. Bang, bang, 7 toys fall dead. If they're yours, you make the rule. Who cares what the toys think? Wipe out a toy's family, then give it a brand new family. Toy children, like Job's children, are interchangeable. Maybe God is kind of a big kid playing with his toys. If he is, what difference does it make if 700 people get killed in a hurricane? Or if 7 kids go to church and get dipped in a big tank of expensive water? But what if all that is wrong? What if God is something else altogether? Chapter 3. We do not worship God. We perceive and attend God. We learn from God. With forethought and work, we shape God. In the end, we yield to God. We adapt and endure, for we are earth seed, and God is change. Earth seed, the books of the living. Tuesday, July 30th, 2020. 2024. One of the astronauts on the latest Mars mission has been killed. Something was wrong with her protective suit, and the rest of her team couldn't get her back into the shelter in time to save her. People here in the neighborhood are saying she had no business going to Mars anyway. All that money wasted on another crazy space trip when so many people here on Earth can't afford water, food, or shelter. The cost of water has gone up again. And I heard on the news today that more water peddlers are being killed. Peddlers sell water to squatters and the street poor, and to people who have managed to hold on to their homes, but not to pay their utility bills. Peddlers are being found with their throats cut and their money and hand trucks stolen. Dad says water now costs several times as much as gasoline, but except for arsonists and the rich, most people have given up buying gasoline. No one I know uses a gas-powered car, truck, or cycle. Vehicles like that are rusting in driveways and being cannibalized for metal and plastic. It's a lot harder to give up water. Fashion helps. You're supposed to be dirty now. If you're clean, you make a target of yourself. People think you're showing off, trying to be better than they are. Among the younger kids, being clean is a great way to start a fight. Corey won't let us stay dirty here in the neighborhood, but we all have filthy clothes to wear outside the walls. Even inside, my brothers throw dirt on themselves as soon as they get away from the house. It's better than getting beaten up all the time. Tonight, the last big window wall television in the neighborhood went dark for good. We saw the dead astronaut with all of red rocky Mars around her. We saw a dust-dry reservoir and 3 dead water peddlers with their dirty blue armbands and their heads cut halfway off. And we saw whole blocks of boarded-up buildings burning in Los Angeles. Of course, no one would waste water trying to put such fires out. Then the window went dark. The sound had flickered up and down for years, but the picture was always as promised, like looking through a vast open window. The Giannis family had made a business of having people in to look out through their window. Dad said that kind of unlicensed business isn't legal, but he let us go to watch sometimes because he didn't see any harm in it, and it helped the Giannises. A lot of small businesses are illegal, even though they don't hurt anyone and they keep a household or two alive. The Giannis' window is about as old as I am. It covers the long west wall of their living room. They must have had plenty money back when they bought it. For the past couple of years, though, they've been charging admission, only letting in people from the neighborhood and selling fruit juice, acorn bread, or walnuts. Whatever they had too much of in their garden, they found a way to sell. They showed movies from their library and let us watch news and whatever else was on broadcast. They couldn't afford to subscribe to any of the new multi-sensory stuff, and their old window couldn't have received most of it anyway. They have no reality vests, no touch rings, and no headset. Their setup was just a plain, thin-screen window. All we have left now are 3 small, ancient, murky little TV sets scattered around the neighborhood. A couple of computers used for work and radios. Every household still has at least one working radio. A lot of our everyday news is from radio. I wonder what Mrs. Giannis will do now. Her 2 sisters have moved in with her, and they're working, so maybe it will be all right. One is a pharmacist and the other is a nurse. They don't earn much, but Mrs. Giannis owns the house free and clear. It was her parents' house. All 3 sisters are widows, and between them they have 12 kids, all younger than I am. 2 years ago, Mr. Giannis, a dentist, was killed while riding his electric cycle home from the walled, guarded clinic where he worked. Miss Giannis says he was caught in a crossfire, hit from 2 directions, then shot once more at close range. His bike was stolen. The police investigated and collected their fee, but couldn't find a thing. People get killed like that all the time. Unless it happens in front of a police station, there are never any witnesses. Saturday, August 3rd, 2024. The dead astronaut is going to be brought back to Earth. She wanted to be buried on Mars. She said that when she realized that she was dying. She said Mars was the one thing she had wanted all her life, and now she would be a part of it forever. But the Secretary of Astronautics says no. He says her body might be a contaminant. Idiot. Can he believe that any microorganism living in or on her body would have a prayer of surviving and going native in that cold, thin, lethal ghost of an atmosphere? Maybe he can. Secretaries of Astronautics don't have to know much about science. They have to know about politics. Theirs is the youngest cabinet department, and it's already fighting for its life. Christopher Morpeth Donner, one of the men running for president this year, has promised to abolish it if he's elected. My father agrees with Donner. Bread and circuses, my father says when there's a space news show on the radio. Politicians and big corporations get the bread, and we get the circuses. Space could be our future, I say. I believe that, and as far as I'm concerned, space and space exploration and colonization are among the few things left over from the last century that can help us more than they can hurt us. It's hard to get anyone to see that, though, when there's so much suffering going on just outside our walls. Dad just looks at me and shakes his head. You don't understand, he says. You don't have any idea what a criminal waste of time and money that so-called space program is. He's going to vote for Donner. He's the only person I know that's going to vote at all. Most people have given up on politicians. After all, politicians have been promising to return us to the glory, wealth, and order of the 20th century ever since I can remember. That's what the space program is about these days. At least for politicians. Hey, we can run a space station, a station on the moon, and soon a colony on Mars. That proves we're doing great. Forward-looking, powerful nation, right? Yeah. We're barely a nation at all anymore. But I'm glad we're still in space. We have to be going someplace other than down the toilet. And I'm sorry that that astronaut will be brought back from her own chosen heaven. Her name was Alicia Catalina Godinez Leal. She was a chemist. I intend to remember her. I think she can be kind of a model for me. She spent her life heading for Mars, preparing herself, becoming an astronaut, getting on a Mars crew, going to Mars, beginning to figure out how to terraform Mars, beginning to create sheltered places where people can live and work. Now, Mars is a rock. Cold, empty, almost airless, dead. Yet, it's heaven in a way. We can see it in the night sky. A whole other world, but too nearby, too close within the reach of the people who have already made life here on Earth such hell. Monday, August 12th, 2024. Mrs. Sims shot herself today. Or rather, she shot herself a few days ago. Corey and Dad found her today. Corey went a little crazy for a while afterward. Poor, sanctimonious old Mrs. Sims. She used to sit in our front room, church, every Sunday, large print Bible in hand, and shout out her responses. Yes, Lord. Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. During the rest of the week, she sewed, made baskets, took care of her garden, sold what she could from it, and took care of preschool children. She talked about everyone in the neighborhood who wasn't as holy as she thought she was. She was the only person I've ever known who's lived alone. She had a whole big house to herself because she and the wife of her only son hated each other. Her son and his family were poor, but they wouldn't live with her. Too bad. Different people frightened her in some type of deep, hard, ugly way. She didn't like the Sioux family because they were Chinese and Hispanic, and the older generation of Chinese is still Buddhist. She's lived a couple of doors up from them for longer than I've been alive, but they were still from Saturn as far as she was concerned. Idolaters, she would call them if none of them were around. At least she cared enough about neighborly relations to do her talking about them behind their backs. They bought her peaches and figs and length of good cotton cloth last month when she was robbed. That robbery was Mrs. Sims' first major tragedy. 3 men climbed over the neighborhood wall, cutting through the strands of barbed laser wire on top. Laser wire is terrible stuff. It's so fine and sharp that it slices into the wings or feet of birds who either don't see it or see it and try to settle on it. People, though, can always find a way over, under, or through. Everyone bought Mrs. Sims things after the robbery, in spite of the way she was. Food, clothing, money. We took up collections for her at church. The thieves had tied her up and left her after one of them raped her. An old lady like that. They grabbed all her food, jewelry that had once belonged to her mother, her clothes, and worst of all, her supply of cash. It turns out she kept it, all of it, in a blue plastic mixing bowl, high up above her kitchen cabinet. Poor crazy old lady. She came to my father crying and carrying on after the robbery because now she couldn't buy the extra food she needed to supplement what she grew. She couldn't pay her utility bills or her upcoming property taxes. She would be thrown out of her house into the street. She would starve. Dad told her over and over again that the church would never let that happen, but she didn't believe him. She talked on and on about having to be a beggar now, while Dad and Corey tried to reassure her. The funny thing was, she didn't like us either, because Dad had gone and married that Mexican woman, Corazon. It just isn't that hard to say Corazon, if that's what you choose to call her. Most people just call her Corey or Mrs. Alamina. Corey never let on that she was offended. She and Miss Sims were sugary sweet to one another. A little more hypocrisy to keep the peace. Last week, Mrs. Son Sims, his 5 kids, his wife, her brother, and her brother's 3 kids all died in a house fire, an arson fire. The son's house had been in an unwalled area north and east of us, closer to the foothills. It wasn't a bad area, but it was poor, naked. One night, someone torched the house. Maybe it was a vengeance fire set by some enemy of a family member, or maybe some crazy just set it for fun. I've heard there's a new illegal drug that makes people want to set fires. Anyway, no one knows who did it to the Sims Boyer families. No one saw anything, of course, and no one got out of the house. Odd that. 11 people, and no one got out. So about 3 days ago, Mrs. Sims shot herself. Dad said he'd heard from the cops that it was about 3 days ago. That would have been just 2 days after she heard about her son's death. Dad went to see her this morning because she missed church yesterday. Corey forced herself to go along because she thought she should. I wish she hadn't. To me, dead bodies are disgusting. They stink, and if they're old enough, they are maggots. But what the hell? They're dead. They aren't suffering, and if you didn't like them when they were alive, why get so upset about them being dead? Corey gets upset. She jumps on me for sharing pain with the living, but then she tries to share with the dead. I began writing this about Mrs. Sims because she killed herself. That's what's upset me. She believed like Dad that if you kill yourself, you go to hell and burn forever. She believed in a literal acceptance of everything in the Bible. Yet, when things got to be too much for her, she decided to trade pain for eternal pain in the hereafter. How could she do that? Did she really believe in anything at all? Was it all hypocrisy? Or maybe she just went crazy because her God was demanding too much of her. She was no Job, and in real life, how many people are?